Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, From the Ground Up, Housing, Energy, and Community Engagement. Before we begin, we at the Medical Society Consortium on Climate and Health respectfully acknowledge that our work takes place on the occupied and unceded lands of Native American tribes. We honor the enduring connection of Indigenous peoples to these lands and waters. We also recognize the enslaved people of African descent, Indigenous laborers, Chinese railroad workers, Japanese Americans incarcerated during World War II, and countless immigrant and American-born workers whose labor has shaped and continues to sustain this nation. Today's webinar is the fifth in our 2025 Climate and Health Equity webinar series as part of the Climate and Health Equity Fellowship Program. The CHEF program recognizes the need for more climate and health leadership and a sharper focus on equitable solutions. The goal of the fellowship is to educate physicians from populations that face greater burdens from climate effects and are underrepresented in medicine to become leaders in climate and health equity education, advocacy, and policy solutions. I'm Dr. Shanita Johnson, Director of the Climate and Health Equity Fellowship. Also joining me from the consortium to run this webinar are Dr. Venice Curry, Associate Director of the Climate Health Equity Fellowship, and Clarissa Payton, Chef Program Assistant. Clarissa will be available through the chat to answer any technical questions during the webinar. The webinar series is hosted by the Medical Society Consortium on Climate and Health and is held for 1 hour on the second Friday of each month from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Today's webinar will be recorded and made available on our YouTube channel and website for future viewing as part of the Climate and Health Equity webinar series page on our website. In this fifth session of the Climate and Health Equity webinar series, we will explore the critical intersections of housing, energy access, and community engagement through a lens of environmental justice. We are honored to welcome Jacqui Patterson, a national leader in environmental and climate justice. Ms. Patterson is the founder and executive director of the Chisholm Legacy Project. A lifelong advocate for equity, she previously served as the director of the NAACP Environmental and Climate Justice Program and was recently recognized with the 2024 Time Woman of the Year Earth Award for her groundbreaking contributions to climate justice. In this session, she will share insights from her decades of organizing and policy leadership to advance holistic, community-rooted solutions to structural inequities in housing, energy, and health. Rather than using our time to provide a further description of her impressive work, we are placing a link to her bio in the chat. The format for today's webinar will be a 40-minute presentation followed by questions and answers from the audience. We remind you to put any comments you may have, links to resources you recommend, or any questions you have for the presenter in the chat box at any time during the presentation, and we will get to as many of the questions as we can during the Q&A period. Please remember to keep yourself muted so we're not interrupted by background noise. And Ms. Patterson, please begin.
Thank you so much. I deeply appreciate you, and I appreciate you all for your interest in this topic and for inviting me to share on it. I look forward to hearing from you during the discussion period. So I thought I would just share a few slides and reflections and a couple of videos here and there to keep us stimulated. And yeah, and it's good to see some familiar names and faces here. So yeah, thank you. All right, so I'm gonna start slide share here. Okay. Yeah, so I want to start with a video actually, because as you know, as many of you know, there is a fairly universally set in the movement's accepted set of principles called the Hey Mesh principles. And some of those principles include featuring bottom-up organizing, letting the people speak for themselves. And so when it comes to letting people speak for themselves, it's not like I can bring the whole community onto this presentation, but at the very least, I can ensure that the voices of the community, like speaking directly are being heard by you first and foremost. And so I want to show a little clip from the Baytown community in Texas, which is a community that's constantly inundated by these storms that come up through the Gulf, and they're also inundated by the fossil fuel infrastructure that drives these storms. And so, as we talk about energy as part of our focus here and health impacts and certainly housing, those intersections, it will be good to ground in the stories of some of these communities and then play. And so when we talk about the core image from the video, this kind of snapshot image, it 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 makes us think about COVID, but this video was made in 2016. And it really tells the story that for so many communities, the air was not safe to breathe and the surfaces weren't safe to touch well before COVID made that a universal reality for almost everyone. And so it really strikes me when I look at these images that COVID became, I mean, even though there were still deep disparities and differential and disproportionate impacts within COVID, but it became this unifier around these protections that everyone needed. But in too many communities, these protections are a constant need because of the public health assaults on the communities. And so as you heard from the spoken word artist, she certainly understands the context in which this community dwells. When she talks about give them a fine, it's fine. She's talking about, everything from carbon pricing to just our failed regulatory system. And that was before the system that we have now, where it's basically no holds barred on polluting in communities. And so as we think about what we want, I want to ground us and remind us of this notion of beloved communities. So often when I'm visiting different communities now, this is so far away. When we do visioning sessions, the questions when we ask the prompts about what people want, it's about stopping the bad, but there's not even, and so often even a notion of what it would look like to have an abundant, thriving, beloved community. And so people are usually like, we want our water to not be contaminated. We want, this to, our air to not be polluted. We want da 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 and 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 so we're always having to go deeper in our inquiries and go deeper and deeper and deeper until we get to folks be able to think about what that ultimate vision is of a thriving community. And so I always want to kind of ground us in this as our vision. And so, but we know why it is that people feel so cowed and so diminished in terms of being that imagination. And it is because of the history that we have. And reminded of this quote, African proverb, until lions write their own history, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. And so when we think about the history of the United States, we know, about the Trail of Tears. We know that this notion of these kind of seafaring adventurers who are coming to seek liberty or religious freedoms or all of these different things, that it's a glorified myth to really obscure from the mission of extraction and what became a mission of murder and displacement of the original inhabitants of this land, and then going over to take people from their original lands to work these lands. So this rampant extraction of people and exploitation of human and natural resources were really the founding principles and practices of this land, enclosure of wealth and power in the hands of a few, and this the subject this the subjection or objectification and so forth of the many. And we see how that continues through our policies, our trade policies, our manufacturing policies, our finance policies are all made to maintain that status quo. And so when we talk about housing, even from then, so we do a lot of work now with freedmen settlements, settlements that were founded by people who were formerly enslaved, people who were quote unquote emancipated, and then who sought and obtained land. Um, so the Homestead Act is one of these policies. The Homestead and Morrill Act were one of the two of these policies that were used to really, again, start to maintain the status quo to the greatest extent possible. Even while you had people who were ostensibly freed, quote unquote, you had these policies that ensured that the people who were getting the assistance, who were getting the hands up after the enslaved labor built the infrastructure of this country, and certainly if anyone was getting subsidies or getting differential policies, it would have been the deserving people whose enslaved labor built this country. But instead, even after they were quote unquote freed, the policies were set up to make sure that white landowners were able to hold on to their land. They were able to acquire more land while we weren't even able to write wills to ensure that our lands stay in our families. So the quote from Martin Luther King, I never intend to adjust myself to economic conditions that will take necessities from the many to give luxuries to the few. And that is the very history and certainly the present day conditions that comprise the extractive economy that is harmed from both human rights and earth rights. And so in this quote, the advantage that wealthy and even middle class people enjoy is at the historical and continuous detriment of the well-being of BIPOC individuals, communities, and populations. This happens through the geographic sacrifice zones of our communities and the virtual sacrifice zones of our personhood. And so when I was with the NAACP, as Sister Shanita referenced, I worked with our team to develop several reports that told the story of what this looks like in terms of the extractive economy and the energy sector and so forth. Cold-blooded, putting profits before people, told the story of the coal-fired power plants that were disproportionately located in our communities that emitted sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, mercury, arsenic, lead, that were harming the health and well-being of the communities that surrounded, with 56% of people in general, given the urban concentration, living relatively near a coal-fired power plant, but 78% of African Americans living within 30 miles of a coal-fired power plant. Then we talk about from cradle to grave, the coal mining industry and the harms, the disproportionate exposure and harms there, with 76,000 coal miners having died of black lung disease, while the National Mining Association actively pushed against policies that would have protected their own workers from coal mine dust and the harms there. There's a community that's in the shadows of a coal-fired power plant in the Navajo Nation. They're holding a picture of a person and their family who passed away during a respiratory illness. They talked about the woman on the left who is pregnant, and we know that mercury is a known endocrine disruptor that disproportionately harms, again, indigenous communities, African American communities who are more likely to be located next to these coal-fired power plants. The ultimate injustice here also is not only were they more exposed to the harms from the pollution, but they have those two coolers on the porch because they, like 70% of the people on the reservation, didn't have access to the electricity that's being generated by the coal-fired power plants. So those coolers kept their cold items while they literally breathed in the fumes that were used to power Las Vegas and Los Angeles at the time, although they've since divested this pull off their dependent of coal altogether. But Las Vegas, where there's so many lights in that city that you can actually see it from outer space, And so literally it is the very epitome of excess. And it's this community, this family that paid the price. We also put out this report, Fumes Across the Fence Line, that talked about the health impacts of air pollution from oil and gas facilities on African American communities. Included talking about things like the impact of fracking that made water actually flammable, and so you hear about the explosions of homes that happened because of the flammability of water that was near these fracking industries. And then we talk about intersectionality of the the fact that if you're living next to a coal-fired power plant or any kind of industrial facility, your property values are lower. That if your property values are lower, if you also have kids who are out of school because of poor air quality days, because of dependence on asthma, and you have all of these factors that are hampering a child's ability to be able to excel in school, because also exposure to manganese and other lead and manganese that both interfere with ability to pay attention in school, tied directly to ADHD and so forth. So if you're not in school because of poor air quality days, you're in school and you're having a hard time paying attention, and all of this, your property values are lower, which then means that the quality of your school systems are funded by property values. And often even when there's revenue from the taxes that the facilities pay, it ends up going into another pot, not to actually fund it's separate from the school finance pot. And so all of these things combine to make you're less likely to be able to be on grade level by the third grade, which according to studies, they show that you're more likely to enter into the school to prison pipeline if that happens. And so this is why this kind of photo montage tells that unfortunate story. And then, as just like the Navajo family, the Dene family that I showed before, that too many families, even whether it's out there in Navajo Nation or whether it's in our urban areas, that they're more likely to be exposed to the pollution from these industries and less likely to actually access the electricity. So we're African Americans, out of everyone, are most likely to have their energy shut off for non-payment, even if their economic circumstances might be the same as someone else. They're an equal amount of arrears as someone else. We're more likely to have our electricity turned off. So this was another report that we put out at the NAACP, a reform, lights out in the cold, reforming utility shutoffs as if human rights matter. And in that report, we told story after story of communities of families that literally paid the price of poverty with their very lives. And this is one such person who had her electricity shut off. Her son had found out that she was having a hard time paying her bill, and he actually paid off her bill. He paid it in full, but the system didn't catch up to the fact that he had made the payment. They shut off her electricity anyway in the middle of a heat wave, and what turned out to be a deadly heat wave for her because she was on a respirator. And because there was no electricity, she couldn't breathe, and she was in sweltering heat on top of it all, and just literally died because the system didn't catch up to the fact that she had paid. But even so, even if she hadn't paid at all, is a $200 bill really worth the life? And that's literally what we're talking about here, not just for her, but for so many others. And then on the other side of this is the climate impacts, which again goes back and then disproportionately harms these very communities again. So whether it's sea level rise that disproportionately harms coastal communities, and some communities might have seawalls or might have other infrastructure to protect them. But again, all of that is also tied to property values and so forth. And so you're less likely to have that type of infrastructure to protect your community if it's a low income community, or if it's a politically like a politically disenfranchised community. And so, I mean, of course, these communities are more likely to be inundated. And also the shifts in agricultural yields resulting from climate change, that the communities where you're more likely to get Cheetos or taquitos or Doritos than quinoa or kale or kiwi fruit. And so these are these are our communities. Too many communities that, again, their diets are full of sodium, full of sugar, and full of preservatives that are not only not healthy, but they're actively unhealthy. And this is on top of the chronic illnesses that we have from living in these conditions in the first place. And it just feeds on each other. And it makes our survival a miracle, not to mention the fact that, as I said before, thriving isn't even on the table for so many of us because survival barely is. And then the disasters. Oh gosh, we all know from reading the headlines every single day how many people are in harm's way as these disasters get more extreme. And we also know from the housing conversation where our housing is more likely to be in floodplains. We're less likely to have flood insurance. We're more likely to have compromised housing stock and so forth and so on. So the more likelies and unlikelies just pile up against the favor of certain communities. And then even we talk about the tie to sub-Saharan Africa. This is from a movie that Where the Water Ends, and it talks about the drying up of certain waterways in sub-Saharan Africa and the fact that it's a gendered task to go and get water. And I can tell you many sad stories about that, but I want to kind of get us from the dwelling in the horrors to actually moving towards some of the solutions. So I'm going to kind of skip past some of this. But also, speaking of gendered impacts, whether it's Native communities or other communities, if you're living along these pipelines or the man camps for these oil and gas rigs, then there's a proliferation of predator economies where there's trafficking of drugs, trafficking of people, and you hear about sexual violence as well as missing and murdered indigenous women along these pipelines. And again, just the um the evils of the fossil fuel industry just proliferate in so many levels. Um, when we talk about the impact and response to the the challenges that people are facing in their communities, whether it's an oil spill or otherwise, the responses are always different. Again, if it's Black communities that are being impacted versus other communities. And so it is this whole dynamic that really it's there was talked about constantly for a while, this whole living while Black as the stories kept unfolding. The person, the men who were arrested at Starbucks, the woman who was sworn by the police as she was leaving her own Airbnb rental that she had legitimately contracted. The Yale law student who was Black who fell asleep in the common room and the police were called. Just time and time again, these are the things that are happening. So they respond to our very existence, but they don't respond to our suffering. Um, Similarly, after Hurricane Katrina, these are two folks engaged in the exact same activities and framed in very different ways. When it's two white people, it says two residents wade through chest deep water after finding bread and soda from a local grocery store after Hurricane Katrina came through the area. But then when it's a young Black man, he says a young man walks through chest deep floodwaters after looting a grocery store. And it's literally the same activity, the same day, the exact same circumstances, literally not one difference in the circumstance, but they're just doing what they need to do to survive. But he is an outlaw. He's an outlaw who deserves to be hunted down. And these are the narratives, and this is the reality of these communities. And so this is what leads to, criminalization. This is what leads to what actually happened in terms of families being shot down, killed unarmed Black civilians on the Danziger Bridge who were just going to look for their relatives back in New Orleans, and they were unarmed and killed by the police. And so for us, racial profiling plus similar criminalization equals an instant death sentence. So all of this is interconnected in this and talk about environmental justice. And so when we talk about um, climate forced migration, I spent a lot of time in Laredo and saw all the different families, some of them from Latin America, some of them not from Latin America, but it was easier for them to come over from sub-Saharan Africa to Latin America because it was easier for them to get in and then make a pilgrimage across Latin America to get into the United States. And all of these folks are literally just seeking refuge because of our actions with us only holding 4% of the global population, but responsible for 25% of the emissions that drive climate change. We are responsible for why people can't live in their homes and their lands. Who wouldn't want to live in these beautiful lands that people are forced to literally escape from in order to be able to survive? But and these are the places that we're flocking to go on vacation or flocking to, but yet people are finding these areas to be unlivable because of drought, because of disasters that are inundating these areas, and because of our actions. And yet when people come, they're treated as people who are, grasping for what we have and grasping for something that they don't deserve but even though this is the land of abundance, a land of plenty in spite of the scarcity narrative. And so we greet people by putting them in cages, um, instead of offering refuge, instead of offering sanctuary, instead of taking responsibility for the fact that they can't live in their own homes because of us. Even in our own communities, we are displaced because of, so people, whether displaced from their nations or within our communities, we end up being displaced even with, they back in the day, they called urban renewal Negro removal, because of the ways that housing development goes. And even with climate action, it can result in, like, well-meaning climate action plans can result in development that displaces communities. This is one of the communities that we work with called Sand Branch, Texas, that hasn't had running water since the mid-'80s. And the Guardian put out this article calling it America's dirty little secret, the Texas town that has been without running water for decades. So again, in this land of plenty, these are the kind of circumstances that still exist. So I want to just do a little musical interlude for you. This is a group called Climbing Poetry that talks about this intersection with disaster equity, climate change, and the extractive economy.
They are selling the rain. They are leasing the rivers. They are auctioning off the ocean to the highest bidders.
I highly recommend checking out. If you look up Bioneers and Climbing Poetry, you can see the whole thing. It's amazing. Oh yes, we will share the link in the chat. So as they talked about the system fueling the inequities, that was a good segue into the corporatocracy. And so, as they say, who's building, who are they building for, who pays and who gets paid? That is the very essence of the corporatocracy. And so this was before one of the Koch brothers passed away, obviously, but the International Forum on Globalization put together this Kochtopus to really talk about how the Koch brothers have this influence, not the Koch, this is Koch, not just the Koch brothers, but the oligarchs control so much, as we know, one bought a major newspaper now, so controlling congressional representatives, controlling courtrooms, controlling academic institutions, and certainly the media and so forth. And so therefore it really brings into question about, do we really have a democracy? Have we ever had a democracy? We put out this report, another report, and did a version 1 and 2 called, oh, Southern. Sorry, I'm looking. Oh, okay. Well, all right. So there's we put out this report, Fossil Fuel Foolery, that talked about the manipulation of the basically the economy and communities attempted by the fossil fuel industries with varying impacts. But so whether it's the trying to quell voters' rights, trying to ensure that we're eliminating any regulations and even claiming that it's regulations that hurt economies, ratepayers, and people who are impoverished, amplifying job creation while downplaying the lacking safety and quality. Um, and again, really downplaying and demonizing health preserving regulations by calling them job killing regulations. And so we talk about these contradictions. So that's the Southern Company headquarters in Atlanta. And it's like, and these other three pictures are the impacts of the Southern Company Corporation and it's polluting, not just it's polluting, but also its domination of policymakers and policy making. And so as we switch to as we shift to the solutions, and then really wanting to talk about, again, the Hamish principles of democratic organizing, be inclusive, emphasizing bottom-up organizing, letting people speak for themselves, working together in solidarity and mutuality, and building just relationships among ourselves, including making sure that we all have a commitment to self-transformation so we can actually live up to the other 5 principles. So this notion of just transition is what many of the frontline communities are ascribing to as a unifying vision. It's a vision-led, unifying, and place-based set of principles, processes, and practices that build economic and political power to shift from an extractive economy to a regenerative economy. And so this framework for just transition talks about stopping the bad in the extractive economy, the dig, burn, dump, the notion of enclosure of wealth and power, the notion and practice of it, the exploitation, the militarization, state-sponsored violence and otherwise, and moving from stopping that bad and moving to a living economy or a regenerative economy that's really founded in values of caring and sacredness, of ecological and social well-being, deep democracy, regeneration, all within this context of cooperation. And so when we talk about stopping the bad, first a quote from Martin Luther King, freedom is never voluntary given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. So we have so many victories that are going on already. The Atlantic Coast Pipeline has been canceled. They were able to ban fracking in Maryland. I would have shown you this video, but we don't have much time left. But this is a community that was able to stop this incinerator from being built in Baltimore. Even in Durban, they were able to stop a gas facility from being built out, and this was their banner that so echoed our own banner: stop the 1% from profiting from pollution. The Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance started in 2009, and now it's risen to where they're walking the halls of Congress, and they're walking the halls of the United Nations demanding power. The campaigning was able to successfully get Bank of America to stop funding coal and killing communities. And this is actually a group of youth who went to Paris and did a die-in there. And it was a Black Lives Matter action, recognizing that whether it's guns in our communities or it's coal in our communities, we're dying a death of 1,000 cuts by the pollution, just as surely as we're being taken down by weapons. This is even some of the faith leaders standing out in front of the American Petroleum Institute saying it's immoral to wreck our planet with your dirty fossil fuels. The Franciscan brothers saying climate change is a moral issue. And then as we talk about advancing energy democracy, we only have about 5 minutes left now, I think 4 minutes left. Or I would have shown you this video, but of a community that rose up after their electricity was turned off by DTE. They organized and they were able to get solar powered streetlights. And so now they're back in the light. This is Power Without Pollution, Energy Without Injustice. This is when Walea Johns was with Native Renewables in California, but then she ascended to being at the Department of Interior there. And so this is what happens when we organize and we build power and we are able to get into positions of power. And so that group was gathered in Cayente, Arizona, with the Southwest Workers Union, Eastern Michigan Environmental Action Council, Kentucky for the Commonwealth, all under this banner again of power without pollution, energy without injustice. Groups like Grid Alternatives training women to get on rooftops to install solar. Groups like the NAACP in Colorado getting together with Vote Solar and training formerly incarcerated persons to join the clean energy economy. In Los Angeles, we partner with the Genesee Center for Domestic Violence Prevention and Intervention. That's the NAACP board chair, and on the ladder is the executive director. We were able to work with the Genesee Center to get solar panels on the roof of transitional housing and train all the women who are residents, domestic violence survivors, to then become independent after financially independent by being trained in solar energy installation, and then being able to all become employed in solar energy and gain that financial institution, taking independence, taking the greenhouse gas emissions out of the atmosphere and putting a job in the place of the dependence on the abuser for these women. Amy Mays was had her energy cut off in Phoenix, Arizona, one of the hottest places I've ever been, and I've been on the equator. And but yet she was able to get her to actually use the money that she would have paid towards the energy, because she kept getting cut off and they kept putting on more fees and kept making her pay more deposits. And she just started to save up her money until she was able to buy solar panels. And then she actually was an electrician. So she used her license to get up on her own roof and install solar panels. And then we worked with her to write this article, Utility Greed Locked Me Out of the Grid, but Solar Panels Set Me Free. So again, so many examples of the leadership. And I want to get us to questions. I'm not going to tell you all of this, but this is just more examples of, our leadership in food justice. Another video I would have played for you, but hopefully next time. Even in green schools, are transitioning from burning waste and burying waste to zero waste, equity-based transportation, equitable and affordable housing, and some of the victories there, clean water for all. Just all the ways that we are rising up. Economic opportunity, not forgetting the soft skills and soft needs around healing justice, restorative justice, and then finally true democracy is critical in order for us to have all of these things. And so really pushing for what democracy, big D and small d democracy, looks like. So I am going to end there with and then this is just kind of putting it all together into what inclusive transition looks like. So many slides. And I will kind of get to the super end. These are just some of the things that we can do, and I'll make sure you have these slides so you can have some of those practical things. This is a video I would have shown you, but I think we really are out of time. But it's a poem that was written and read at the UN climate talks, I think in 2015, called Dear Matafeli Pinam, and it was a poem that a woman wrote to her baby, I think 8 months at the time, and she read it in front of the United Nations, and it was a turning point for the UN climate talks, to be sure. So yeah, and then just ending with a quote from Martin Luther King: "We have before us the opportunity to inject a new dimension of love into the veins of our civilization. It really will take love. It will take us coming together in love to do all of the audacious things that are necessary for us to have a thriving economy for all of us. We have to remember that it's possible." but it's the power of love that's going to make it happen, because we certainly see what's happening with the power of hate. So that's us. And looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you so much, Ms. Patterson. This was a wonderful and informative presentation. And we are excited to get 2 questions also. There is one in the chat already, which is, how are the budget cuts in the Big Bad Bill going to impact these solar panel initiatives and programs?
Yes. So I think there's a couple of things. So even before the Big Bad Bill, the solar panels were in trouble. Everything from the tariffs is definitely an issue, to the the basic rollback of the IRA and all of these, the Inflation Reduction Act and the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act, and kind of the freezing of any clean energy initiative, alongside the acceleration of all fossil fuel initiatives. And so it really has put a major challenge around these things. And at the same time, to some extent, private philanthropy has stepped up to try to fill some of the gaps, but we were talking about billions of dollars that was available through the federal government before these cuts. And so philanthropy, even though there is billions of dollars in philanthropy, and you would think that this would be a time that folks would see that this is, they always talk about kind of saving the endowments for a rainy day, and we are very much literally and figuratively in a deluge here. So so there is advocacy now to get philanthropy to release more of the 5% of their endowment spend that they usually do. And some of them are doing more so that we can continue to have investment and advancement of not just solar energy, but other mitigation and initiatives. But it's, compared to what it was before, it's not quite enough. Also, I'll just add too that other governments from other nations also recognize that, just like I said before about being 4% of the global population and 25% of the emissions that drive climate change. So just like all those other global South nations, or people of the global majority that are being impacted, like the whole world is being impacted by our ongoing dependence on fossil fuels and the level of fossil fuel emissions that we have. And so other nations are even investing in our clean energy transition. So we do have some gap filling that's going on, but again, not quite enough.
Thank you, Dr. Olele.
Oh, wow. This was a great presentation. And the thing that got me, it was very simple and subtle that you put in, is the quote from Martin Luther King about freedom and oppression. And it got me thinking about everything, and just your examples of, we're always looking for our elected leaders to be the ones to initiate and do it. But when it comes from the community, are saying enough's enough and it's time for a change, and how we could make impact via making sure that if a leader is not doing the job, we primary them.
Yes.
Also, impacting people through the dollars, because people see dollar signs and power. And when you take away the economics and power, they're going to listen, and they're going to listen to your demands. So even when President Obama said that we are the ones who are waiting for that because he's a community advocate, before he became president, this was very powerful, and just reminded me of that, saying that we have the power that we're looking for. Is just, we got to take them accountable and say, hey, we could take your power away too,
Right. Absolutely. Yes. And I appreciate you invoking the "We Are the Leaders We've Been Waiting For." For our team, I bought a book by Eddie Glaude called "We Are the Leaders We've Been Waiting for the holidays, and sent it to and since we were trying to divest from Amazon, I went through the very, very clunky Barnes and Noble situation. But anyway, that aside, I can give my trauma stories from that. But We Are the Leaders We Were Waiting For was as again that book and that conversation that we were having about like what it means that each and every one of us is a leader, and we can't continue to just rely on those folks there who aren't democratically elected and certainly aren't representational governance for the most part. So yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, this has been very inspiring. And I'll pause if there are any last questions. Otherwise, we do have to wrap up. We have gotten to the end of our hour very quickly because it's been so wonderful. Thank you for sharing your time and expertise with us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
And I would like to thank all of you for participating in our webinar series. I hope you found it useful. As a reminder, these webinars are held on the second Friday of the month, and our next webinar will be August 8th. It will be at the same time. Before you leave, we ask you to take a moment to complete our webinar survey if you haven't already. The link is in the chat. And next month's session will be on transportation and energy conservation. So if you would just hang around for a moment and complete that survey, we appreciate that. And have a wonderful weekend. Thank you, Ms. Patterson.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you all.